Hello out there, YouTube. It's me, Logan Albright, and I'm back to wish you a happy October. It's my favorite time of the year. Halloween is coming up. I'm so excited. And so for my book review today, I thought I would do something a little bit spooky, a little bit thematic for the season, and something I had never read before, and I just recently finished it. It is Washington Irving's classic short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Now, I was familiar with this story through all the adaptations over the years. I watched the Disney cartoon as a child. I watched the Tim Burton version with Johnny Depp. So it's like in my brain as part of pop culture, but I had never read the actual story. So I got this wonderful Library of America volume of Washington Irving's writings, some of them. You know, I love the Library of America. I think they do excellent work. And this story is part of a collection called the Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, which is a series of vignettes that are largely about the author or the, pseudonymous author's journey to England and what he experienced there. It's kind of a strange collection because it's mostly not stories. It's mostly just like little scenic, picturesque descriptions of the things that he encounters, like various locations and people or traditions. And it is scattered through with a couple of little stories. And one of them is The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Another one is Rip Van Winkle, which I would say that as a writer, Washington Irving is pretty much exclusively remembered for Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Again, Rip Van Winkle is one I knew through popular culture, but had not actually read. So I'm pleased to say that I have now read this series of stories now, and they're really good. I have a real fascination and appreciation for these kind of 19th century authors that originated in the northeast part of the United States. People like Nathaniel Hawthorne and Edgar Allan Poe and Herman Melville, and Washington Irving was from New York. So he's among that crew. And I think they have a real kind of there's this real spooky flavor to these writers. They really kind of capture the old history of New England. That's where the Salem witch trials took place. There just seems to be something kind of vaguely supernatural and spooky about that part of the country. And I feel like these writers really tap into that, and you get a real sense of it in their writings. And it's one of the things I love about them. Washington Irving's prose is very well written. It's very beautiful. Lots of big words, lots of long sentences, typical of the kind of period in which he was writing. He was actually born in the late 18th century and wrote well into the 19th century, so he's a little bit older than some of these other authors. He's considered by some to be the father of the American short story. Great writer, very witty, a lot more kind of humor in these stories than I would have expected, but also just good at painting the scene. And The Legend of Sleepy Hollow itself comes near the end of the collection, and it is kind of framed as a story that was found among some papers of an old gentleman, and it's kind of framed as this old folk story that has been passed down through the generations. And it takes place just at the end of the American Revolution, and it takes place in this little valley, little hollow in the Hudson Valley in New York. The story is about 30 to 40 pages long, depending on the edition you get in, so it's not super long, but it's also not super short. There's enough time to really develop the flavor of the story, and to me, it's like the perfect Halloween story, because he does such a good job of evoking fall and the harvest and that time of year. There's all this stuff about pumpkins and apples and big bonfires and people gathering around in the shadows of the evening to tell stories about ghosts and goblins and witches. The protagonist of the story, Ichabod Crane, who's the schoolmaster in the town, is fascinated by Cotton Mather's history of witchcraft, and so he's kind of a superstitious, supernaturally minded character. And he comes to town and establishes a little reputation for himself as a man of learning, a man of letters, and he becomes a favorite of a lot of the women in the town, and he becomes infatuated with this young woman who's the daughter of the rich farmer who's got the biggest, most sumptuous fair in the land, and he has all these big events and invites people to partake of his elaborate farm that is worth a lot of money. And Ichabod Crane becomes fascinated with his daughter Katrina, and he's courting her, but unfortunately everybody else in town is also courting her. And chief among Ichabod's rivals is a young man who goes by the name of Brom Bones. His actual name is Abraham, but he goes by the name of Brom Bones, and he is described as kind of a rough and rowdy, burly, strong troublemaker, who's basically a good guy, but a little bit boisterous and a little bit rakish in the way that he goes about things. And they're competing for this girl's affections, who's described as a coquette and someone who's kind of teasing and not really committing to any one person. So they're both trying to win her affections. And of course, Brom Bones is very jealous of Ichabod Crane. So one night there's this big party at Katrina Van Tassel's place, hosted by her father. And they have all this food and drink, and it's a wonderful event, and everybody in the village is there. and they start telling stories after dinner about ghosts and witches and things like that. And this local legend is raised, this legend of the Headless Horseman, who was believed to be a Hessian soldier who fought on the side of the British during the American Revolution, whose head was taken off by a cannonball, and who at night rises from the grave to try to search for his lost head. And people say that they've seen him. People claim to have encountered him along the road. And Brom Bones tells a particularly chilling story about having encountered him and having raced with him to the church bridge. And this ties into that old superstition that, specters and ghosts can't cross running water. So you say once you get to the church bridge, you're kind of safe. Ichabod Crane is very superstitious, and he has a meeting with Katrina that night, and he leaves looking kind of dejected. We don't know why. And he goes home on his kind of beaten down nag, and he becomes very afraid of the spooky woodlands that he has to cross through on his way home. And he sees the Headless Horseman chasing him, this rider that apparently doesn't have a head and is carrying his head on the pommel of his horse. And he chases him through the woods, and Ichabod Crane just flees in terror, goes like mad towards the church bridge, and just when he gets there, the Headless Horseman throws his head at him, and it's knocks him out apparently. And then we cut to the next morning, and Ichabod Crane is nowhere to be found. No one can come up with what happened to him, and they find his hat and his shattered pumpkin at the base of the bridge. And some say that he left town because he was afraid, and he had been rejected by Katrina, and he went to go live somewhere else and had a perfectly fine rest of his life, and that perhaps Brom Bones was responsible for a prank that got him out of town. And other people, wiser people, say that the Headless Horseman spirited him away into the night. And that's basically the story. But it's told with such just color and beauty, and it's got this great spookiness about it, and it really sets the scene well. The characters are really well drawn. You really kind of get a sense of who these people are. And I think it's a perfect story for Halloween. Although the word Halloween is never mentioned in the story, it doesn't take place at Halloween necessarily. It just feels like the late autumn, and it feels like a Halloween kind of story because it's got pumpkins and it's got all these spooky ghost stories embedded in it. And I love that kind of writing, and I think all these New England and New York writers of that time period really seem to have tapped into that kind of feeling of the supernatural in the Northeast, and they really do a good job of explaining it. I think it stands head and shoulders above the rest of the collection of stories. Rip Van Winkle is also very good. It's quite funny, a lot funnier than I would have thought. And there's also another story called The Spectral Bridegroom, which is sort of a ghost story, but not really. That was also pretty good. But it's clear to see why Irving's reputation was built mainly upon this story and on Rip Van Winkle. There is some wit and there's some humor in it, but it's got a little bit of everything. It's got some scares, it's got some humor, it's got some romance, it's got some satire. It's just great. And I think that, you look at other writers who you associate with Halloween, like Poe or Lovecraft, and they're a little bit more, I don't know, I guess their stories are a little bit more serious or a little bit more sinister, and they often involve kind of nasty scenes of torture or death. This one doesn't have any of that. It's a lot more family friendly, you could say, because it's all spooky, but all the spookiness is sort of implied. And I think it just is a perfect story for the season if you're looking for something to read. It'd be great to gather a family around the fire or something, or some friends around the fire, and read this story on a Halloween night, because it really captured the atmosphere. I actually went back and rewatched the Disney version of this, which I hadn't seen since I was a child, and my memory of it's weird. I had very vivid memories of parts of it being very frightening and very affecting as a child, and there's just certain things that really stuck out in my mind. I went back and watched it again. It's actually a pretty cool adaptation because they take whole chunks of the text intact from what Irving wrote and put it into songs and into narration, and it's not simplistic literature. It's very it's early 19th century literature, so there's a lot of big vocabulary words in there, and this is a cartoon for children, but they stick it all in there, and it's fine, and it's just very colorful, and I think they do a good job of capturing some of the images that were explained in the story originally, and the characters are exactly how you would picture them. It's a lot less scary than I remembered it being, obviously. As a 5 or 6 year old, you see it's pretty terrifying, but now it's the songs are pretty goofy and the animation is fairly goofy. There are a little bit scary parts towards the end, but it's really not as scary as I remembered it. But I think it's a pretty faithful adaptation and pretty good. It has held up a lot better than I expected it to, given that the last time I saw it, I was probably 10 years old. So I enjoyed that, but I'm really excited to read more Washington Irving. This volume has a couple novels, and a history of New York, which I'm not sure how fictional or realistic that is in here. I've just read the sketchbook so far, but I want to read more. But if you're looking for something to kind of raise your hackles on Halloween and get you a little bit spooked out for the season, I can't recommend highly enough The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It's just a perfect story for the season, and I hope you will take that under advisement. So that's my book review for today. I hope that was useful for you, and I hope you will come back and watch my next one, because I'm always reading more books, and I'm going to do another review for you just as soon as I possibly can. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave me a comment down below on things you'd like me to read or recommendations. And I will catch you next time. Thanks so much.